Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, fall is here and we are deep in it. And I am very happy to be continuing, jumpstarting, reigniting our ongoing Meet the Independent Candidate series with a leader who is right smack dab in the middle of all of it. This is a very tense time in America after the Charlie Kirk assassinations. Just yesterday, Trump announced he struck another craft off the waters of Venezuela. There are now expanded National Guard deployments into Memphis happening. But Maine is very much going to be the center of our discussion, of our culture, and of independent politics. So I'm very happy to be continuing to meet independent candidates who are stepping up to meet this moment. And joining us in this episode is the great and powerful Senator Rick Bennett. Welcome, sir, to Independent Americans. Great to have you here.
Paul, it's great to join you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Um, Anyone who listens to this show and has heard my previous conversations knows that I care very deeply about Maine. We had Senator Angus King on recently, and I think in many ways, Maine is an amazing place, but also going to be a bit of a mirror, not just on where America is, but where it can be. You're a lifelong Mainer. I want to get into your background and history, but let's just start with where are you and who are you? Tell folks who are meeting you for the first time a little bit about yourself, sir.
Sure, happy. I live in rural Maine here in the town of Oxford, a small town of about 4,500 people. I have the honor of serving 14 communities around me here in the state Senate. I've done that since 2020 and had earlier service back in the 90s and the early aughts when I was a young man climbing the political ladder. I actually served as president of the Maine Senate back then when we had a tied Senate, which is an interesting experience, unanimously elected then. And, I went off and focused on building businesses in Maine. I ran a company that employed people and we turned it around and then I have been involved in a couple other businesses and raised my family, two kids, beautiful kids, 29, 27. And I really wanted to get back in because politics is so deeply broken. And I decided to run again in 2020. I've been a lifelong Republican. I actually chaired the state party at one point. I served as president of the Senate while I was a Republican. And I was reelected in 2020 as a Republican, but I've been I told my constituents then that the last thing I will think about when I'm voting and giving voice to the concerns of Maine is party politics, and I've stayed true to that. And I decided this year as a continuation of that mission that I really felt I had to run for governor and do so as an independent because the parties have become part of the problem. They're a large part of the problem, and frankly, Americans need to work without the parties, can work without the parties. I think our democracy would be stronger without the parties, and they've really outlived their usefulness.
I want to celebrate your Declaration of Independence, which I think happened in June, right?
June 23rd. My wife and I went down to the town office in Oxford, and I signed the papers, and she signed the papers, and I have to tell you, it was a liberating experience.
I hope that becomes more contagious because I think it's a trend in our politics, especially. We've had Todd Achilles was on recently, and Brian Bangs, who had run as Democrats. Now we have you on, who had run as a Republican, and now you're declaring your independence. And I think, I talked to somebody today who said, I'm not even sure how I do that, which was a testament to kind of how convoluted the process can be. But can you answer a question? Because you're going to now be defining what it means to be an independent at a very important time. And a lot of folks ask me, okay, but what does an independent stand for? Because there are so many different kinds of independents, and people, especially at the presidential level, who've called themselves independent. What does it mean to you to call yourself an independent on this political spectrum?
Means that I put the people of Maine first, period. I respond to no other pressures aside from what's good for the people of Maine. No dogma, no ideology, common sense solutions for people across Maine. I think that's what people are hungering for. They're tired of the false promises that the parties do, the false hostility that they engender in people, the real hostility that they engender in people. Politics has gotten to a very dark place. Part of my mission is to restore some joy, some kindness. some civility and some love. When you start talking about love in politics, people go like, "Oh, what's that all about?" It's critical that we treat each other like human beings. And in my faith, that means treating people with love. And, love your enemy. It's gotten to a really bad place when we start thinking of our people who have differing views. We used to call them adversaries, then they're enemies, and now they're somehow morally inferior because they have differing views. This is a really bad place. People are being driven out of politics who need to be there. We need their energy, but we need to be inclusive. We need to listen. We need to make politics fun again by being inclusive and listening to all points of views. And that is not where politics is right now in the parties. We need to reclaim it. And that's what my independent candidacy hopes to be an agency of.
I think it's really important. I don't want to just celebrate that point because it is a dark time and people are looking for hope. They're looking for optimism. They're looking for love. And I think love is about treating each other with respect and civility and kindness, right? Just basic kindness. And I think
Yeah.
now we've got too many examples in our politics of meanness, of petty, of vindictiveness. And to hear you talk about that, I think is especially important to people who feel politically homeless, for young people who are looking for something to reach onto and often find it in partisans. Maybe some people found, Charlie Kirk as a source of love. Some people may find Mom Donnie as a source of love, but to say it and name it, I think is really important, especially in a place like Maine where there's so much community, right? Where neighbors are so dependent upon each other, and that love manifests itself in a different kind of community. And I wanted to just ask you to talk about why you think Maine has a history of independence, why it's ripe. I'm wearing again my stand firm, ye boys from Maine shirt that I wore when Senator Angus King was on. Shout out to Loyal Citizen in Portland, where I got this shirt. But there have been other independent governors for Maine, right? James Longley in the 70s, Angus King, of course, in the late 90s. What is it about Maine that makes being an independent viable? And I think even more so popular and increasingly popular probably in the years to come.
Yeah, I think the thing about Maine is that Maine is a big, small town. It's 1.4 million people. There are cities across this country that are much larger in population than the state of Maine, where a bunch of urban neighborhoods and rural villages, where I call them urban. My biggest city is Portland, Maine, with 65,000 people.
Yeah.
So, we have a tradition in Maine of town meeting style politics where people have very strong disagreements. Their elbows might be sharp, but they do treat each other as neighbors. They see the guy that they're arguing with at the selectmen's meeting at the grocery store. The kids are in school together. And there's a sense of personal responsibility and personal accountability that creeps into the politics at the community level. What I've seen, though, is that in the state legislature, government has been taking on the hyperpartisanship and dysfunction of Washington, D.C., and that's really sad. I mean, there's a big difference. I said I served back in the 90s and then I'm serving now. Huge difference. It's a difference in partisanship, in the way people talk about each other. A lot more business being done behind closed doors in partisan caucuses, which are not open to the public, which crazy. I put a bill in to change that, to make party caucuses in the state legislature fall under the same laws as town governments and school boards. And the one thing the Republicans and Democrats could agree on, of course, was to kill my bill unanimously. Uh,
Right, right, right.
so, but it's that the kind of thing that animates people's involvement in their community. Don't think about politics. They think about community. And that's where I think the difference lies. Now, that manifests itself in this history of ticket splitters. We have Congressman Jared Golden and here in the second congressional district, most of rural Maine, where I live, and he's won election after election, notwithstanding Donald Trump winning the second congressional district 2 times while Jared Golden's been on the ballot. So you got somebody giving the win to the Democrat for Congress, and handsome majorities to President Trump. So people like to think independently about the people that are on the ballot. Oftentimes they've met the people They know them. There's some sort of sense of community, or they know somebody who knows them pretty well. It's that kind of word of mouth and that personal accountability that makes all the difference, I think, in our politics in Maine.
And it's very interesting to watch right now. I've been watching Golden. I've known him for a long time. He's also a veteran.
Mhm.
And I keep watching to see if he'll leave the Democratic Party, right? I mean, he's the kind of person we're watching to see. Don Bacon has been on this show before,
Mhm.
who feels like he's about to leave the Republican Party any day now and maybe would run for president as an independent. We've seen the opposition to independence, outright attacks, right? And the system is rigged against it. Can you talk about why more people aren't leaving the Republican Party right now? And I hear from folks who say, okay, if I leave, how are you going to help me? You know, where are the super PACs? Where are the ground games? Where are the consultants? Can you talk about why you don't think more people are leaving the Republican and the Democratic Party at a time when their brands are both increasingly toxic? And then also, if you can, sir, talk about the nuts and bolts, now that you've done this both ways, about how it's actually harder to run as an independent than it is as a Republican.
Yeah, I think everybody has to make their own choices, but in Maine, we have this new law, which is the semi-open primaries, which means that you can be enrolled as an independent, and we're now more numerous than Republicans or Democrats in Maine. And as an independent, you can go vote in whichever party primary you wish to vote in. So that has been encouraging in the growth of independence because you used to have to pick a side. I think that law is just taking effect, and so some people are learning about it. And so I don't know on an individual voter by voter level why the party enrollments are staying what they are. I think most people are one party or the other because their parents were, and
Mm,
that still holds.
yeah,
And they figure they'll vote for whomever they will in the general election. Now, among office holders, why aren't people leaving? There's this really strange and I would say an unhelpful kind of socializing of politics around these groups and these sort of tribes where there's this like sense of need of getting along among elected officials. I see this in the legislature, immense social pressure to vote a certain way just because the party is telling you to do that. And it happens on both sides. And
mm,
it's heretical to do that differently. Since I was reelected in 2020, though, I made a point of, listen, I spent plenty of time in caucus with these Republicans. I'm going to go out to lunch with Democrats, and the communication isn't even happening now. So those
mhm.
relationships aren't there. It's a strange world, but I have to say that it's always the electeds who will end up following the people. It's never the other way around. So I think that
Yeah,
we're coming to a place where that's going to change radically. And I also have to say one other thing before I get to your second question, which is, you know, in the information age, people have grown a heck of a lot less reliant on institutional guidance.
yeah,
Institutions themselves as gatekeepers of information, of decision making, because we can crowdsource information, we can go to trusted sources, we can find them, right? Across the map, media, universities, the professions, all these institutions have toppled. Where's the one place that haven't yet toppled? Party politics. The duopoly stands. I think there's a reason for that because of the way that it's built in and institutionalized within the fabric of law, but that is cracking. That's changing. You're seeing
yeah.
states take the lead on this. You're seeing candidates emerge who are presenting viable alternatives. And when that falls, it's going to fall in a hurry because the emperor has no clothes. There is no need for these parties. So, however, in the meantime, to get to your second question,
Yeah.
it's a challenge, because money, number one, right? Number one is all of the money systems flow, the infrastructure of campaigns, all built around party apparatus. But that's changing too. There are groups springing up, and I know you're aware of them all across the landscape, national level in states that are providing resources to non-party candidates. Just things like voter lists and texting
Yep.
and that kind of outreach facility. You used to have to go to party committees. Now you can find ways around that thanks to technology. and the availability of information. So all of that is part of this cracking of this foundational structure, which is propping up this flawed, failed system that is no longer in service of the people. That's the real challenge. The parties like to talk about these issues on the fringes that get people all wild and animated, but it's the issues that often are straddle people's existence, their family life, their work life, that are more challenging, more sophisticated, nuanced, energy costs, education, how our schools are performing, right? There aren't like bumper sticker answers to these things. You need everybody at the table to try to deal with. We got a huge problem, as many places do across the country, with housing. Housing
Right.
is not like easy. It involves some subsidies to help people really need it, some deregulation to make sure the rules are in place that make sense to drive down costs so people can afford it. And, it's about communities, people living together and deciding how to live together. These are not really issues that the parties are well equipped to deal with, particularly now. So I think that the very fact of the issues that we face, I think that those sorts of things are going to help drive more people to be independent.
I mean, I think, the 20th Maine arguably won the Civil War. I think Maine is in a position to kind of lead on this political battle in breaking up the duopoly. And maybe most importantly, like Nebraska, which we've talked about a lot on this show what the future can look like, right? Show what an alternative can look like. And I think an independent is especially well positioned around an issue like housing, where you have, as an example, you have your private sector background and you have your government background. So you can meld those two and bring people together to be. I think the best thing independents can be are the get shit done guys and gals, right? And that's what,
Exactly.
right? Fixing the
Yeah.
potholes, building houses, keeping us safe, the things that government's supposed to do that I think almost everybody can agree on. And especially,
Particularly,
please, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, particularly in executive office.
Right,
The governor office is a place where people just want somebody to get things done. They want
right.
to solve problems. They want somebody in there who's going to like ignore all the noise. I mean, in the legislative branches, whether it's Congress or the state legislature, they expect people to fight and do their thing. But the rubber meets the road in the executive
And in
office.
a place like Maine, you've got to keep the ports running. You've got to make sure the snow plows are out. You got to hold the utility companies accountable. Your wintertime in Maine is hard. And I've always said the only political office I want is summer governor in Maine because I think that would be great. Being governor in Maine in the summer would be awesome, but being governor in the winter is often kind of what breaks executives, right? Can you be a good mayor? Can you be a good governor? Well, we'll find out when that first blizzard comes. We find out when that first flood comes because that's when you've really got to show you have the dexterity to pull people together, to chart a vision, to get things done. But you're also facing a pretty crowded environment here. And I want to ask you, I ask every independent candidate that comes on, who are you running against? And I've got like one, two, three, four, five at least folks that are also running. You've got the Secretary of State, the former Senate president. You've got, I think, two members of Congress. Angus King's son is running, but as a Democrat, which I talked to him about. And another, little known independent or unaffiliated candidate. Can you talk about how you view the landscape? And given all
Sure.
those other factors, what's your plan to win?
Yeah, so we're having a primary, or they are having a primary under Maine law in early June. And so, there's most of the candidates running are running under one party or the other. And I feel like I've got a marvelous runway in the meantime to talk about the issues that really matter while the key party candidates are talking about the issues that matter to a very, very narrow group of people yelling each other in a silo. And so I intend to take advantage of that time, and I'm doing that. I'm doing meetings across the state with people of all political stripes. Yesterday, by the way, to make a point you were making earlier, I was at a diner in Mechanic Falls, Maine, and I went table to table, and I just lightly introducing myself because it was September before an election year. So, but I said, "Hi, I'm Rick Bennett. I'm running for governor." And a lot of people are like little fearful, in their eye. And then I'd say, "I'm running as an independent." And their faces just washed over with a big smile, people shaking my hand. Thank God. These are ordinary people going
Yep,
to a diner in
yep,
September in Maine.
yep.
So I think there's so many people that are unspoken to that I have this opportunity over the coming months before this primary, like 9 months of just talking directly to ordinary Maine people, not partisans, not people who, who live, breathe, and, politics, ordinary people, to learn what is on their minds, to learn from them, and to create my own network. So that's a very big part of it. Yeah, I mean, and I'm very fortunate because of my personal history, I'm quite well known in the state, and as I mentioned, I've been, president of the Senate. I served as president of the Senate when Angus King was governor, and
Mhm.
we worked well together. I worked, as I said, in a tied Senate, which never happened before, and we had an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. So, it's it, it's a real opportunity to do things a little differently and to speak to the issues that really matter to people. So I think that's the key to success is, are you actually, and then what you said is, like, people want a proven uh, go-getter, somebody who's done things. And I've done that in business. I've turned around some businesses. I've worked across the aisle in politics, solving some issues and working on various issues of real importance. I got a track record. My dog Belle's just entered here. She's a sweetie. You might have heard her barking a little while ago. But yeah,
What kind of dog? Hold on, we got to pause because we make room
yeah.
for dogs. Always make. We need more dogs in our politics. What kind of
Here,
dog is Bell's, and how old is he or she? Yeah.
Belle
Yeah.
is a name. She's a Southern Belle. She's from Georgia, and she's an American Pit Bull Terrier.
All right.
She's the sweetest thing you can imagine. She's about 2 years old. My wife and I flew down and then drove her back a couple of Februarys ago to bring her back to Maine and give her a home. Um, so
She's gonna have to adjust to those winters coming from Georgia.
she'll make a really good first dog.
Well, let me ask you a tough question here because I celebrate dogs. I celebrate your candidacy. We are
Mhm.
also operating in a bonkers political environment, and governors are going to be at the epicenter of it. Let's, a year from now, let's say you're elected governor. Trump will probably continue to be on a plan that creates an imminent conflict with every governor in America. He's now sending National Guard troops into Memphis. He's had conflict with a guest on the show, Wes Moore. We've had other governors and senators on here, and we kind of, for those of us around the national security world, you could see this coming. There's going to be a point, hypothetically, but more likely than not, where every governor will have to decide, am I okay with Trump activating my National Guard or sending National Guard in from, let's say, Georgia or Tennessee or somewhere else? So I know you can't get into hypotheticals, but this is a
Mm.
real world scenario that almost every governor is going to have to face. Trump says tomorrow the crime is out of control in Portland, and I want to send in the National Guard to make sure tourists are safe in Portland. How would you approach that situation as the commander in chief and governor of Maine?
Yeah, fortunately, crime is not out of control in Maine at
Which
all.
doesn't matter, right? For his rationale.
I would just answer the question this way. When President Trump is helping Maine, I'm with him. When he's hurting Maine, I'm against him. I feel the same way about any federal authority, whoever is president. As governor, I'm going to be looking after Maine people, and that's number one. That is my job. That's not his job. It's not a president's job. A president's job is to look after the country and sustain the Constitution. And I have to say, rule of law is tremendously important. And if there's ever a question, I go straight to the rule of law. What does the law say? And that's where I will find the answer.
I appreciate that because I think we're kind of in the first wave right now, which are the folks that are, either compliant, right? You're going to get Sarah Huckabee Sanders, or you're going to get the ones that are adversarial, like, Wes Moore and Gavin Newsom. But there are a lot of the more moderate governors that haven't been tested yet. And
Yes.
that's likely the second and third wave if he continues on what he's expressed to be a pretty transparent plan for expansion of the use and federalization of our troops and National Guard, right? And there's another factor here too. You've got a border. right? I mean, he could
True.
argue there's a border up there that needs to be secured, and he wants to secure the entire nation, and therefore there's a federal a priority, a national security priority, and he needs to secure the northern border against immigrants or migrants or any other number of things. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch, and I appreciate
Yes.
that it's nebulous right now to some extent. But can I ask you
The
to
good,
finish?
the good thing,
Yeah,
the
please.
good thing about being an independent is that I don't have to, I'm not under any party pressure, regardless of whether there's a Democrat or Republican in the White House.
But it
It's
also means you
going
have
to
no
be,
backup. It also means you have no backup, right?
my backup is the people of Maine and my ability to convince them that I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah. I want to give you a chance. We haven't talked a lot about issues. If you were going to say one, two, and three, what are
Yeah.
the top things you're running on in Maine that people care about and that you want to tackle as governor?
Yeah, first and foremost, we talked about a little bit is housing. Housing is a great problem. We've got a lot of dilapidated housing in rural Maine. We also have a challenge because there are many parts of Maine that are doing very well financially, but the workers can't afford to live in those communities. Teachers, firefighters can't afford to live in some of these suburban Portland communities because of the cost of housing. It's a supply demand issue. Studies show we need 80,000 housing units in Maine by 2030. That's 5 years. We got to really move in order to deal with this crisis because it is a crisis and it affects our economy. It affects young families being able to afford to build a life here, and that's critical. Um, Along the same lines, that property taxes are just killing some of our people, and particularly our seniors on fixed incomes. I have some ideas about that. I know I'm going to go more than three, but I got to say, energy costs in Maine are higher than the rest of New England. It's a dire circumstance. It's holding our economy back. It's holding back the electrification of our economy, which is where we need to go and our education system. Recent studies have come out showing that our schools are not performing well in terms of student testing. We're down in the lower echelons. We used to be the top. Parents want to know what's going on with our schools.
Yeah.
So we're going to be tackling that one too. But there's a huge landscape, and I'll just say all four of those issues I just happened to mention. I could add on they're not partisan issues.
Yeah.
They're not simple partisan solutions to them, but these are the issues that really matter to people.
Yeah, I mean, housing costs, taxes. I mean, these are taxes is one that I don't think enough people are talking about, especially independents. It's something that everybody faces as a small business owner, myself, as a
Yes.
homeowner. Everybody sees it, right? And I think that's a forward edge of where more people want to hear politicians address. And it's interesting to see, you talk about it as an independent. There are Republicans talking about it. Mom Donnie is talking about it a lot, right? And I think there's a common thread line, which is people are concerned about affordability. And people are
Yes.
concerned about prices and whether they can afford to live where they are. But let me ask you one last question that's unique to Maine. I was talking to some friends from Vermont and from Maine who talked about the impact that the drop in tourism had this summer. It's noticeable. And I think places like Florida, as they ban vaccinations, people from the UK, people from Canada are going to go somewhere else. Maine, is vacation land. It's so reliant on tourism. Can you talk about your assessment of how much the tariffs, the adversarial relationship with Canada, the overall non-loving atmosphere has had on tourism in Maine, and how
Yeah.
you would tackle that, assuming Trump's still going to be there? How do you offset that if you're the governor of Maine?
Yeah, the data has shown that the cross-border crossings this summer have plummeted between Canada, and we're surrounded really on three sides by Canada. I mean, New Hampshire's on the other side in the
Yeah.
Atlantic Ocean, but it's we rely on New Brunswick, we rely on Quebec in particular as our direct neighbors, and there's a long storied tradition of folks coming down from Montreal and Quebec to visit our beaches and that's happened less. And not only do the numbers show that, but I've talked with a number of people who are crossing the border who are finding it just too stressful and too difficult and too time
Mhm.
consuming to do it. And they feel like they're really being punished for trying to cross the border. And keep in mind that in Maine, There are lots of families that live on both sides of the border.
Right.
I mean, Calais and St. Stephen's, and it's like, and so it's really inhibiting a lot of that naturally occurring sort of cross-border camaraderie. And so we're just going to have to we're going to have to get through this period. It's a real challenge. Our current governor went over and visited and said, "Hey guys, please come. We're still welcoming." And she got an earful from the
Yeah.
premiers of the
Yeah.
provinces she was talking to.
Yeah.
And I think these look, people will abide by policies where they make sense, where they make common sense. And if a president or a governor can go to the people and say, look, I'm doing this, I know it's a bit painful, but it's short lived, and we're going to get back to a new normal, and here's why I'm doing it. That's what people want to hear.
Hmm.
And I think and particularly if you're going to impose something for a longer period of time, politicians need to justify their actions. And otherwise you get serious unrest in a hurry. And
Hmm.
I worry about that happening with this cross-border stuff. And particularly, it's, it's in the short run here, it's been quite harmful to our economy in Maine.
Yeah, I know that to be true, and I think it's going to be a real challenge. And I think it's a long tail impact in places like Florida and Maine. Here in New York, we see it.
Yeah.
Tourism is down, and that is impacting people's bottom line in ways that they're only starting to feel. Sir, I appreciate you going through this whole ringer of
Yeah.
questions. Let me ask you a final one because you've been a public leader for a long time. You're a trusted role model. This is a really difficult, scary, dangerous time in America. And
Mhm.
I want to give every guest I have on this show an opportunity to talk to people. There are a lot of folks who are hearing from you from the first time. I encourage folks in Maine to support you, encourage folks around the country to support you. But as a father, as a public leader, can you speak to this moment? It was the day before 9/11, and right now tensions are very high, and people are scared. Some folks are intimidated. Free speech is in the crosshairs. Can you share your thoughts on this moment and speak directly to the country on what you think we need to be thinking about and hearing?
Yeah, I think this is a very difficult time for people, and it is a scary time. And I would just simply say that our country has withstood amazing amounts of of fear and of difficulty and challenges. I mean, you want to talk about the Civil War. You mentioned the 20th Maine and their heroics. These are ordinary people standing on a ridge and looking at, without ammunition and being told to fix bayonets and pivot down the hill and pretend they're more people than they were. And they did. And, I think the thing I'm really hopeful about is a couple things. One is just the sentiment of ordinary people in this country. I don't think that's died. I think we are still a country founded on principles and values and their shared values about the importance and the worth of individual human beings, about the equality and of our neighbor, and about our belief in freedom and the greater purpose that we're all in as Americans. So we've got that to rely on ourselves. I think the other the great thing I find encouraging is the next generation. My generation has pushed so many problems forward to them. And what I see in my kids and their contemporaries in their 20s are people who think creatively, think critically, think skeptically, who don't take, what they're told at face value, who have the tools and the technology to work in a collaborative spirit. Those folks, if they're interested in politics, they're not interested in the politics of fear. They're interested in politics of hope and aspiration. And I have so much confidence in this up and coming generation of young Americans who I think are going to solve these problems because they have the spirit to do it. But yeah, it's a tough time, and we need to the extent we can put aside our fears, and particularly our fears of our fellow person that we see on the street. There's so many people in need who are dealing with a lot of difficulty, and they're dealing with the same stresses that you are. And it's just absolutely critical that we treat each other like human beings and just remember that person that you don't know that's lying on a street corner or is like having a moment in a store. they're a human being. They need love. They need love and they need compassion, and they're our fellow person and our fellow citizen.
I thank you for that. I thank you for your example, for your leadership. I want to congratulate you on declaring your independence.
Thank you.
Welcome to the future. Welcome to the majority. We need you. This is going to be like the 20th Maine for our politics. And I think if there's a message that we should communicate coming out of this conversation is be more like Maine. Maine is a place. I told my kids this summer about a story when I was a kid and we were going up to Lake Sebago and our car broke down. And I remember this image of being in the back of the station wagon and an old couple that pulled over and took us in. And we had dinner at their house. And for almost my entire life, we would stop and visit them every year because that's the spirit of Maine, is helping your
Mhm.
neighbor and taking care of each other and looking out for each other. That's what makes Maine great, and that's what makes America great. So I think this time, especially in this moment, we can all be a bit more like Maine. And that'll do America some good. In the meantime, sir, we're excited for your campaign. I encourage everyone to check out your website, chip in and support them if you can. If you're an independent veteran running in Maine or anywhere else, endorsements are going to open this week for Independent Veterans of America. I encourage you to apply and spread the word. A lot of veterans in Maine who we need to step up and run for office. But Senator Rick Bennett, I hope you'll come back again. We wish you all the
Thank you,
best.
Paul.
Thank Belle for her patience and wish you the best out there. Good luck, sir.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Appreciate
sir.
you.
Stay
Thank you.
vigilant.
Yeah, you too.